All right, let's get started, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Sutron Global Educational Webinar for December. We're going to be doing a 2020 wrap-up and covering a lot of different things today. We're very excited to share it with you. This will be our final COVID-19 webinar of the year. So why don't we introduce who's on the call today? We've got Michael Hughes, who's coming to us from London, UK. We have myself, Tanya Anderson. I'm from Vancouver, BC. And as I'm sure you're all aware, we have our special guest speaker who's coming to us from Toronto, Ontario in Canada. Michael, why don't you jump in here and tell us a little bit about Sutron Global?
Happy to. Thank you, Tanya. So welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us for this final session of the year. We're happy to have such a good crowd again. It's been a good series, and we're hoping that you found them useful in what's been a challenging time. So for those of you that don't know, we do have one or two new people here today, and welcome to those. Sutron Global is a cloud-based library, knowledge, and information management solution provider dedicated to managing library transformation. How we do that is evidenced on the next slide, where you can see just briefly some of the different solutions that we offer to the information professionals that we work with. So core to the offering is the ILS, or the Library Information Management System. But increasingly over time now, we have adapted and seen an increasing need to help people manage digital content, electronic content, KM assets, as well as corporate archives and special archives. So there's many strings to the bow, and many ways in which we can help you. So if we just move ahead to the next slide there, as you know, we're all convened here as part of the COVID-19 series that we've been putting on for the last sort of 6-8 months. For those that don't know what that is, in addition to the series of educational webinars that we've been providing, we are also offering financial assistance to anybody that's interested in onboarding with any of those solutions that we saw on the previous screen. So if anybody would like information about that, please reach out to us, and you can find out how to do that at the end of this session. And there's also some evidence, or some links rather, on the screen here as to how you can follow us and keep abreast of what we're up to and what's going on, and you can reach out to us there. So on to the next slide again, please, if we can. Before we just go ahead and introduce our speaker for today, there will be a question and answers section at the end, as there always has been throughout this series. But the nature of our topic today may not lend itself necessarily to that many questions. So I might just flag for your attention at this point, if anybody has any positive stories to share, any little snippets or any gems that they can think about that have come up in the last sort of 6-8 months, perhaps take some inspiration from what Joan will say, and it might just spark a thought in your mind. Just jot them down, and perhaps you might like to share them with us through the questions option on the GoToWebinar panel, normally to the right side of your screen. But yeah, without too much further ado, I'll hand it back over to Tanya, who will just introduce our speaker, and we will be underway with our presentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Joan Rataic-Lang, who is coming to us from the Toronto Lawyers Association. Joan, why don't you jump in here?
Okay. Thank you, Tony, Tanya, and Michael, for giving me this opportunity. It's been lots of fun doing the presentations I've been doing over the course of the year. You have given me a chance to learn and grow, and I really appreciate it. And for the audience, I've been doing these talks not to tell you how to do anything, but I'm hoping that I can help you to live what I call your best life. And notice there's an emphasis on your. In the times that we are living in, that may mean different things to different people. So I hope that today everyone will be okay with me doing something a little bit out of the ordinary. This is really not just a typical presentation for librarians and information professionals. It's a little broader than that. But then again, this year has been a little bit different, so I think it warrants it. Also, I have to thank Slides Carnival for the template for today's presentation. I'm not creative enough to do this, so I acknowledge them, as I'm supposed to do in their copyright statement, and also wanted to let you know that the photos you'll be seeing have been taken by me. So again, copyright has not been infringed. And There we go. Advancing slides is a little bit slow on the internet sometimes. Challenge is certainly a term that we can apply to 2020. I certainly don't need to tell anyone what a difficult year it has been. In the course of the year, I've talked about professional development plans, leadership, and information overload in past presentations without acknowledging that many of us are struggling to get from one day to the next. And now it's time to talk about that.
Joan, do you want me to move the slides forward for you?
Sure, because
Okay.
that arrow is not working for me. So next slide. Okay, walking the Camino de Santiago de Compostela was the most amazing experience of my life. Many of you have heard me mention it already, but I have to tell you, it's not easy. If you follow the green dots on the map, you'll see where we walked. We started in France, walked through the Pyrenees Mountains and all the way to the other side of Spain to Santiago, which is in Galicia. That was 750 kilometers, and if you're in the United States, that's 500 miles. I learned a lot of lessons during that 35 days of walking, and I think that some of them can be applied to our lives now. Maybe we're already doing those things, and if not, I'm hoping that we might start doing some of them in 2021, because it certainly doesn't look like things will be changing very quickly. So, Tanya, next slide, and let's talk about what are these life lessons and what are the parallels to what we're living now. Life is not a race. When I was going to Spain, my friend and I departed from the airport in Montreal. There were a bunch of people sitting around in hiking boots with backpacks. We assumed they were going to the same place as us. So we all chatted at the airport in Montreal. We took the plane to Bordeaux, and from there, we made our way to the train station. As you can see by this photo, these are all the people who came off that plane. We had a lovely breakfast in a cafe. We explored Bordeaux on foot, which is, I would recommend it, a lovely city to visit. And then finally, our train was leaving, and we took it, and then a bus, and arrived in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. So you can imagine the group of us got to spend quite a bit of time together, and we became friendly. They were nice people. But then as my friend and I walked, we separated from them. Everyone went on their own way to the extent that we all stayed in different places, but people kind of walked the same amount on average. So we would run into some of these people. And one of the ladies we would see regularly. And her questions, she would always start conversations with, where did you start walking today? What time did you start? How long have you been on the road? How many kilometers have you covered so far? I have to tell you, it felt like a race, but I wasn't there to compete. I was there for myself. Eventually, we actually started avoiding her because she wasn't fun anymore. Next slide, please. In our everyday lives, it's easy to get caught up with comparing ourselves to others. Facebook and Instagram are constantly reminding us of how much better everyone else is. How wonderful the home renovations are, what a great vacation our friends had, and how amazing their children are. I ask that you don't get caught up in that, especially now. If social media makes you feel worse, quit it. You don't need social media. Perhaps you have been furloughed and are looking for a job. That does not mean that others are better than you. Decisions made in a crisis are not always logical, nor are they considerate of human emotions. The facts that they are based on sometimes don't make sense either. If you are working now, more than ever, show your colleagues empathy and compassion. And if you are not working, don't take it personally, but do take care of yourself. As you can see, we met lots of other friendly people on the Camino. Next slide, please. I'll give you a second to read this definition. When I think about this presentation, I think that empathy is the foundation of what I'm talking about. And just to make sure we have our terms correct, I'm not talking about sympathy, which is a feeling of pity or feeling bad for someone. Empathy is really about showing and understanding, and it's a close cousin to compassion. And those are the things that I'm asking everyone to use, especially now, although I wonder why we have to remind people to be empathetic anytime. Now, in our working lives, there are a few examples of when it's easy to be empathetic. When we're welcoming a new person to a team at work, that's usually a positive thing. And we have fun where it's nice to introduce ourselves to people and welcome them to our team and understand that they're happy, they've started a job. But when we're saying goodbye, it's harder. If a colleague has been cut because of budgets, or they're leaving because of illness or family reasons, it's harder to show that sadness that we may feel. It makes us feel uncomfortable and awkward. So sometimes we don't say anything. I like to ensure that we celebrate the important life milestones at work. We always have something around birthdays, cupcakes or a cake, marriages, babies being born. Those are all happy events. And we make sure we celebrate those. But how do we acknowledge illness and death? To remain silent or somehow, it's a question, do we remain silent or do we somehow recognize them? They are part of our life cycle, and I think that we have to acknowledge them as well. Children are a big topic of discussion among parents, at work, socially, wherever we go. I know I have 2 grown children. Now, how do employers treat parents? Are school closures and all the other challenges acknowledged and respected? There are opportunities for empathy in everything we do. Next slide, please. One of the lessons I learned on the Camino was to tend to your wounds and don't eat the pain. Now, blisters are extremely common because, of course, you're walking a lot. And there are people who came prepared and those who didn't. But I found that while walking, bandages, ointments, and advice were frequently shared. People helped each other. I'm not showing you a picture of some blistered feet, but a very hot and sweaty Joan. Back in 2017, when we walked part of the Portuguese Camino, Portugal was gripped by an intense heat wave. Next slide, please. The heat got to us. My walking companion, who is very fair, got a bad heat rash, as did many people. Our feet were swollen and we consumed massive amounts of water. And we decided we weren't having fun. We had walked 750 kilometers a couple of summers before that and didn't find the experience as difficult because it was cool and rainy. So we decided we had to take care of ourselves. We stayed in the lovely pension. Our suite had a bathtub, and soaking in it was great for the heat rash and the swelling. And this is the sitting room in our pension. Next slide, please. Now in Toronto, we're in a second wave lockdown. During the first wave, I was at home and I felt myself getting depressed. It was hard to be at home all the time, cooped up in the house. Don't get me wrong, I love my family, and even after 34 years of marriage, still enjoy my husband's company. But that doesn't mean that trying to figure out how to run the association while listening to the constant doom and gloom didn't have an effect. So I did what works for me. I started taking really long walks. Even in my city, there are paths and trails, as evidenced by the pictures here. I discovered others showing kindness to strangers. There was a certain little path where the children obviously were having lots of fun painting rocks, leaving messages to those of us who were walking. I made the walks fit into my schedule and made sure I was taking care of me. What are you doing for you? Next slide, please. Now, we're all different, and that's okay. There are all kinds of walkers, and I'll show you a few when we see the next slide come up. So we met a bunch of people, let me tell you, lots and lots of people on the Camino. Rick is in the first picture. He was quite elderly. I can't remember. I think he was in his 80s. And he would walk for an hour or two, maybe. And okay, we can stop there. And he often took a cab after an hour. There are solitary walkers. The gentleman in the middle shot was our friend Rial. He was great fun at dinner and all the socializing in the evening, but he enjoyed his alone time. Now, some traditionalists would call Rick, the person who took the cab, and the biker you saw in the last shot, cheaters. But you know what? I think we're all just different, and we're all doing things in a way that works for us. No one is better than anybody else. We're simply different. And that's what makes life interesting. Now, I love the fact that I met people from 25 countries and had short chats or in-depth conversations with all of them. Thank goodness English is the language of the world, although I got to use my high school French and even some of my Croatian. When you look at this picture, you'll notice we're all different, and yet as pilgrims, we look a little bit similar. Clothes, cars, size of home, job, none of those were significant when we were walking. They weren't obvious to any of us, and people simply didn't ask the question. So we all looked a little the same, perhaps somewhat disheveled with a backpack and boots that were often muddy. So we had nothing obvious to judge each other on, which meant that when we started talking to someone, we'd wonder, why are you doing this walk? What drew them to the experience? And from there, the conversations became interesting and you really got to know people. I wish that we could live that way in North American society. We'd probably all feel better if we accepted each of us who we are, as we are. Next slide, please. Now, I also discovered that we don't need lots of stuff to be happy. I carried a backpack. I wore a pair of pants and had another pair in my pack. Along with that, there were a couple of tops, a polar fleece for when it was cold, a hat, and a waterproof jacket. I was happy. I had what I needed, and I carried it all in that purple pack that you see in the first shot. But it wasn't so much that it weighed me down. You'll see there were stores that catered to pilgrims, and even the ones that we stopped in were small and functional. We had to wash our clothes by hand unless we wanted to use a washing machine, but that felt kind of wasteful when you didn't have a lot to wash. But sometimes we'd have a luxury like a ringer at a hostel we were staying at. So after 35 days of very simple living, I came home and said to my husband, let's sell the house. It's too big. We don't need all this stuff. Next slide, please. From here, I could go on a rant about the commercialism of our society, but I will leave that to the experts. You'll see, many of you will remember the book by Naomi Klein, No Logo. There are lots of people out there who will talk about this message. So if you are curious, I walked my first Camino in 2013, and in the spring of 2015, my husband and I did sell our house. Next slide. When you're walking, you have to live in the now. You have to focus on where your feet are landing. Roman roads, farmers' paths, trails through the woods, and walking along the highway all require your attention. Add rain to the mix, and it falls quite a bit in northern Spain, and a lack of attention could easily lead to a slip and fall. Next slide, please. So while I was walking, my mind was not planning what would happen 3 weeks from now. I was focused on today. Where would we be eating lunch? Because when you walk that much, you're always hungry and the next meal is important. And what town was our destination for the end of the day? Sometimes we could see a little further ahead when we had a path like is in this photo, and we knew where we were going and what lay ahead of us. Now, I have to admit, I struggle with this piece of advice at home. Mindfulness is a concept that I try to apply, but it's hard. If any of you have any advice at the end of the presentation, I would love to hear it. Next slide. Now, there are other things people tell you to do when times are tough. Dr. Laurie Santos is a Yale professor of psychology, and she has lots of advice. If her name is familiar, it may be because you've heard of her podcast, The Happiness Lab. Turns out she's one of the most popular professors at Yale University. She has five evidence-based coping strategies, and none of them are related to more money, a better job, or amazing vacations. So next slide, and let's look at what Dr. Laurie Santos recommends. Her first recommendation is that we all exercise. According to her, 1/2 hour, that's 30 minutes of cardio, is equivalent to 1 Zoloft. Well, if that's the case, it's no wonder that I felt amazing when I was walking on the Camino. We walked an average of 25 kilometers a day for about 5 hours of walking, but there were lots of breaks in between. What you see here is my favorite day. We were walking on top of a mountain range, and I felt like I could reach up and touch the clouds. As usual, I was taking pictures, enjoying the view, and of course, falling behind my walking companions, who happen to be the little dots you see walking on the trail. Now, it's hard to get exercise at work. I know that. But, you can take the stairs, not the elevator. On your way to work, you can get off the subway or bus early and walk a stop or two. You can start small and you can build up to more. Maybe eventually you'll take an evening stroll or a weekend hike. Now, of course, there are people who are swimmers and cyclists and like to do other things, and they will have lots of suggestions for you as well. The point being, try to keep moving. You will appreciate it. Next slide. On the Camino, I didn't have to cook, I didn't clean, and every day I enjoyed the meals. Most of them were very hearty and simple, and occasionally they were fancy, but that wasn't too often. This particular lunch was in a town famous for its cheese. Tomatoes were in season, the bread was fresh, and the cheese was delicious. Hence, the smile on my face. Besides the food, every day I had a bed to sleep on, even though it was usually just a bunk. I was always thankful. I'm sure many of you would say that you'd be thankful too if you didn't have to cook. But I have to say, it also rained a lot, but my coat was waterproof and the Tilly hat was great at keeping me dry. I had to carry my backpack. That was my least favorite. But even with that, I had lots to be grateful for. Now, what do we have to be grateful for? We may have to look harder than we used to, but surely there is something we have to be thankful for. The love of our family, either immediate or extended, the care of friends. The job we may have may look different than before, but we're still employed. Or if we're not working, maybe we have more time to spend with our family or do the things that we enjoy doing. A common suggestion when you read about gratitude is to write down what you're grateful for. Take a few minutes every morning. They can be simple things. The taste of the coffee, the fact that the house is warm, you're enjoying the radio or watching an interesting TV program. Whatever it is, the things that give you pleasure, write them down every day. And apparently, in 2 weeks, you'll feel a difference. I don't do a lot of this. I'm a pretty positive person, and I find that it kind of comes naturally for me. But some people have to work at it. Next slide. Positive sleep habits are very important. As I said earlier, we walked 5 hours a day. So naturally, we developed fairly positive sleep habits. We were exhausted at the end of the day. And then on top of that, if you were staying in a place that didn't have electricity, or there was a lights out policy, you were forced to get to bed early, get rested, and ready for the next day. Now you may be exhausted at the end of the day, not from the physical, but the emotional. That can take its toll on us too. So it is important not to sit up wondering, worrying, and playing with the device, but to try to get some sleep. So if you ensure those good sleep hygiene habits, no devices in bed, keeping a regular time, that will help. And if you have to, force yourself to do it. Next slide, please. Getting social is important. Time with friends and family is better than being by yourself. Sure, there are times when we like to be by ourselves, but always by ourselves is probably not the healthiest. When we were sleeping in a hostel, we naturally had people around us all the time. We also had communal meals. There were services and celebrations for pilgrims. And it felt like we were walking with a community of people. So we were always being social. But who feels like being social now? And as a matter of fact, we're not even allowed to be social. We're told to stay home, not to mix with people. That's hard. But still, surely we can pick up the phone and call a friend, take the time to chat with a colleague at work, check up on an elderly relative. We have to be safe, but we can still reach out to people. And now it's probably more important than ever to make those connections. Next slide. Her last recommendation is be with your emotions. Now, Dr. Santos talks about RAIN, recognizing, accepting, investigating, and nurturing. At the beginning, I said that it was not easy to walk 750 kilometers. There's lots of time to think when you're doing that. I'm the person in the green raincoat there, and I'm standing next to something called the Cruz de Ferro, or the Iron Cross. It's the highest point on the Camino. Now, the Camino is an ancient pilgrim trail dating back to the 800s, and the Iron Cross has been on top of a wooden pole and apparently was placed in this area in the 1100s. There's a tradition. Pilgrims are supposed to bring a pebble from home and drop it at the cruz. Now, for me, that was a symbol of leaving something painful behind, and that was significant. My father had taken his life many years before, and I carried the pain of that with me. The pebble was in my pocket, my pants pocket, every day. I thought about my father. I even happened to have made friends with a gentleman whose best friend had also taken his own life. We bonded over the shared pain, and at the Cruz de Ferro, we left our pebbles and some of that pain behind. For me, there was healing in that walk. Now, we cannot deal with our emotions if we do not recognize them. And there can be many depending on what we're struggling with. Anger and guilt are common where suicide is concerned. Losing a job can result in fear of failure or feelings of unworthiness. Living in a pandemic can make us tentative, afraid, hesitant. Once we recognize those emotions, we need to accept or allow them. We can't beat ourselves up over those feelings. We're human. We need to accept our foibles. It's not unusual for humans to react by judging or blaming others, by numbing ourselves to our feelings, or trying to focus on something else. None of these reactions are healthy. We can also investigate our own experience with kindness and care. And finally, we have to nurture ourselves with self-compassion. Next slide, please. No one knows what the future holds. The association that I'm working at is trying to figure out when or even if we're going to hold our marquee event of the year in 2020, our awards gala. But the question is, when will vaccines be ready? Obviously, I wrote this a while ago because now we're starting to hear about vaccines. When will they be distributed? There's still a lot of questions around that. And will people feel safe even after that? There are just too many unknowns that we cannot predict. We have some ideas on how to proceed. Personally, all we can do is try to live day to day and remember that life is not a race. Let's put the competition aside. Live your best life. And if you're hurting, tend to the wounds, be they physical or emotional. Take care of yourself. As they say on an airplane, put your mask on first, then help those around you. We're all different. Respect each other. Try to put yourself in another person's shoes. Understand why they are the way they are. Live in the now. Next slide, please. Now, people talk about returning to how things were before. I have to say, I'm not sure that's what I'm looking forward to. I hope that we've all learned something from the experience that we're living through. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there were so many articles geared towards leaders and people who supervise staff, reminding us to be empathetic. And my question is, why did we have to be reminded to treat people respectfully and kindly? Maybe sometimes we have to work at helping ourselves and others. It's easy to be in a rush to say, oh, that they understand. I don't have to explain myself or show a little more courtesy. But maybe that's not the case. Let's work at it. Just like the people or person who took the time to ensure that this very important Camino sign didn't get covered by the flowers. Those arrows are a symbol of where you walk when you're on the Camino. You don't even need a map, you just follow the arrows. And if this beautiful flower had covered over that arrow, a lot of us would have been in trouble because we wouldn't have known if we go left or right. But someone was paying attention and taking care of that. In the same way, we need to pay attention and take care. And that's all I have to share with you today. I hope you take something from it. We can go to the next slide and see if there are any questions or any comments, if anyone has anything they'd like to share with us.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joan. Certainly appreciate that insight and quite personal as well information that was shared there. So we certainly are grateful for you for putting that together for us. Just reminder, if anybody does want to share any sort of common wisdom or something that may have worked for them or is helpful, then please do so in the questions section, which, as I say, is normally towards the right side of your screen on the GoToWebinar panel. But personally, I particularly like the live in the now idea, the concept, and the idea that one should do that. And also, what's worked for me, that I was interested to see the mention of Laurie Santos. Very interesting, actually. Her course, believe it or not, I think it was the most popular course of all time at Yale University, and that's some 300 years of history, which is quite an achievement, really. So there must be some merit to that, and it's well worth looking at. And if anybody is interested in doing that, I think there's a free course available at Coursera. So if anybody is not aware of that, then we can certainly share links for that and make people aware of that if they are interested. So please let us know if anybody doesn't have that, or just go ahead and look it up yourself. But please do. But yeah, thank you, Joan. Very, very good. I don't think we've got anything else coming through on the chat or on the questions. So oh, we've got one coming through. We've just got just a note of thanks. So yeah, very, very gratefully received. Thank you, the person that's just offered those to us. That's really nice to hear. So let me hand it back to Tanya, and we'll round us out and close the session. But from me personally, thanks ever so much for your attention over this series this year, and I hope everybody stays safe and well. Back to you, Tanya.
Thanks, Michael. And for myself as well, thank you, Joan. This was a great presentation, and I really enjoyed hearing it and just taking those things to heart, because it's been nice to know that other people feel the same or struggle the same. A little bit of connection, if you will, from everyone. So everyone, as usual, please feel free to follow us on social media to get all of our updates. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. All of the COVID-19 educational webinar series is on YouTube if you want to watch it or catch up on any that you've missed already. We'll include a link in the recording for you. But we really enjoy having everyone here. Thank you for attending. If you have any questions for Sutron Global, please email us at info@sutronglobal.com. There's Joan's email as well. And if you'd like to see our knowledge services blog, news, and more, we do have some great articles from Guy St. Clair and Michael actually himself, who has written some great pieces that I enjoy. Visit sutronglobal.com to you subscribe or just even read some of our blogs. All right, thank you again, everyone. Take care. We hope you all stay safe, and we'll see you hopefully in 2021. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thanks.